Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English After Hours. I'm Tim.
And I'm Steph. Tim, I'm still laughing about what my grandmother told me during our phone call last night. She was describing her friend's new smart TV and said, "Steph, this television can do everything except make my morning coffee. In my day, we had 3 channels and we were grateful for them."
That's hilarious. Your grandmother has such a great perspective on how technology has changed.
What really struck me was how she continued the conversation. She said, "But you know what hasn't changed? Every Sunday, I still make the same apple pie recipe my mother taught me in 1952. Some traditions are worth keeping, even when everything else is different."
That's beautiful. There's something profound about maintaining family traditions across generations, especially when the world around us changes so rapidly.
Right? And then she started telling me about how she learned that recipe, standing on a wooden stool in her mother's kitchen, measuring flour with her tiny hands while her mother guided her through each step. The recipe wasn't written down anywhere. It was passed along through stories and shared experiences.
Oral traditions like that are so precious. It makes me think about my own family's history. My grandfather used to tell stories about growing up during the Great Depression, and those stories taught me more about resilience and community than any history book ever could.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how these personal family histories connect to larger historical events and social changes. Your grandfather's stories and my grandmother's cooking traditions are both part of how history lives in everyday life.
That's such a good point. History isn't just dates and events in textbooks. It's the lived experiences that get passed down through generations, shaping how we understand the world today.
And you know what's fascinating? My grandmother's apple pie story got me thinking about how different cultures preserve and share their histories, some through cooking, others through music, storytelling, festivals, or religious practices.
That's true. In my classroom, students often share traditions from their home countries, and it's amazing how similar the underlying human experiences are, even when the specific practices are completely different.
For people learning English, especially preparing for IELTS, being able to discuss history, traditions, and cultural heritage is so important. These topics come up constantly in speaking and writing tasks.
Absolutely. Plus, understanding how to talk about historical events, cultural practices, and traditional values helps people connect more deeply with English-speaking communities and share their own cultural backgrounds.
I think our grandparents' wisdom about preserving traditions in changing times perfectly sets up today's lesson.
I couldn't agree more. History and traditions are all around us, shaping our daily lives in ways we often don't even realize.
Before we explore history and traditions vocabulary, please remember to subscribe to English After Hours, hit that notification bell, and give us a thumbs up.
And remember, we upload new English lessons every single day. Make sure you don't miss tomorrow's episode.
Today we're covering essential vocabulary for talking about different historical periods and events, describe cultural traditions and practices, historical sites and monuments, and how to express ideas about cultural preservation and historical significance.
Since I'm interested in American history and educational traditions, while Steph comes from a family with rich cultural heritage and storytelling traditions, we can explore different aspects of how history and traditions shape our understanding of the world.
Let's start by talking about how family stories and personal histories connect to larger historical events.
Steph, your grandmother's stories sound like they contain so much historical context. How do family traditions help us understand broader historical periods?
Family stories make history personal and relatable. My grandmother's Depression-era childhood memories help me understand that historical period much more clearly than academic descriptions alone ever could.
Can you give specific examples of how her stories reflect broader historical trends?
She often talks about how families shared resources during difficult times, neighbors helping each other with childcare, sharing garden vegetables, and repairing each other's household items instead of buying new ones.
Those survival strategies reflect the economic cooperation that developed during that era.
Exactly. And her cooking traditions actually preserve Depression-era practices, like using every part of an ingredient, creating filling meals from simple ingredients, and preserving food for winter months.
So traditional recipes can be historical documents in their own way, showing how people adapted to economic and social circumstances.
Right. Food traditions often reflect immigration patterns, economic conditions, available local ingredients, and cultural exchanges between different communities.
Do you think your grandmother consciously thinks about preserving history, or is it more natural and unconscious?
I think it's mostly unconscious. She maintains these traditions because they connect her to her mother and create family continuity, not necessarily because she's trying to preserve historical practices.
That's interesting. Sometimes the most authentic historical preservation happens naturally through family life rather than formal efforts. Your grandfather's stories sound equally rich in historical content. How do his experiences help you understand that time period? His stories about community cooperation during the Depression taught me how economic hardship can bring people together rather than divide them. He described how neighbors shared tools, labor, and resources without expecting immediate repayment.
That's a valuable lesson on social resilience during difficult times.
He also talked about how entertainment was mostly homemade. Families gathered around radios, played music together, and created their own games and activities. It helps me understand how people built strong social connections without modern technology. His stories also included details about racial and social divisions of that era, which helps me understand how historical progress has occurred alongside continuity in other areas.
Personal stories provide nuanced understanding that textbook summaries often miss.
Now let's learn essential vocabulary for different historical periods and events.
Historical periods: ancient times, medieval period, Renaissance, Industrial Revolution, modern era, contemporary history, prehistoric, colonial period.
Historical events: war, revolution, independence, discovery, invention, migration, cultural movement, social change, economic crisis, political reform.
Describing history: in the past, long ago, centuries ago, during that time, back then, in those days, throughout history, over time.
Let's practice discussing historical periods and events. This vocabulary is essential for IELTS speaking and writing about history and social development.
Can you describe a historical period that particularly interests you and explain why it's significant?
I'm fascinated by the Industrial Revolution because it fundamentally changed how people lived and worked. Before industrialization, most people lived in rural areas and worked in agriculture, but factories and cities created completely new lifestyles.
What specific changes during that period do you find most significant?
The development of transportation systems like railroads connected distant regions and allowed people to move more easily. New manufacturing processes changed what goods were available and how they were produced. But industrialization also created new social problems like urban overcrowding, pollution, and difficult working conditions that societies are still addressing today.
That's a great example of how historical understanding helps us recognize patterns and ongoing challenges.
What historical periods or events from your family's cultural background do you find meaningful?
My family's immigration history in the early 20th century reflects broader patterns of people seeking economic opportunities and escaping political instability in Europe.
How do those immigration experiences connect to larger historical movements?
My great-grandparents' decision to emigrate was influenced by economic depression and political tensions that affected millions of people across Europe. Their experiences of adaptation, language learning, and cultural preservation are shared by immigrant communities throughout American history.
Personal family history becomes a way to understand broader historical forces and social changes.
Now let's learn essential vocabulary for cultural traditions and practices.
Traditional practices: customs, rituals, ceremonies, festivals, celebrations, religious observances, cultural events, traditional clothing, folk dances.
Cultural activities: storytelling, music traditions, handicrafts, traditional games, seasonal celebrations, coming-of-age ceremonies, wedding traditions, funeral customs.
Cultural preservation: passing down traditions, maintaining customs, preserving heritage, cultural identity, ancestral practices, traditional knowledge, cultural continuity.
Let's practice describing cultural traditions and their significance. This is very common in IELTS speaking tasks about culture and personal background.
Can you describe a cultural tradition or practice that's important in your family or community?
In my family, we have a tradition of gathering for large holiday meals where multiple generations share food and stories. These gatherings maintain family connections and provide opportunities for older relatives to share family history with younger members.
What makes these family gatherings culturally significant?
The storytelling aspect preserves family history and cultural values, while the shared meal preparation involves traditional recipes and cooking techniques. Different family members contribute dishes that represent their personal traditions or regional backgrounds.
These gatherings also provide space for discussing current events in the context of family history, helping younger generations understand how they fit into larger historical and cultural narratives.
How do you think these traditions help maintain cultural identity across generations?
Regular family traditions create shared experiences and common references that strengthen family bonds. Do you have cultural traditions that connect you to your family's heritage?
Besides my grandmother's cooking traditions, our family maintains storytelling practices, or older relatives share memories and family legends during special occasions.
What do these storytelling traditions accomplish for your family's cultural identity?
They preserve family history that wouldn't be documented elsewhere, and they help each generation understand their place in the family's ongoing story. The stories also contain cultural values and life lessons that get passed down informally.
Oral traditions like that are powerful ways of maintaining cultural continuity while allowing for natural evolution and personal interpretation. Now let's learn vocabulary for historical sites, monuments, and cultural heritage.
Historical sites: museum, monument, memorial, historical landmark, heritage site, archaeological site, cultural center, historic district.
Heritage preservation, restoration, conservation, cultural heritage, historical significance, archaeological discovery, preservation efforts, heritage protection, cultural tourism.
Visiting historical places: guided tour, historical exhibit, interpretation center, educational programs, cultural events, heritage trail, historical reenactment.
Let's practice discussing historical sites and cultural heritage experiences. This vocabulary is useful for IELTS speaking about places, travel, and cultural activities.
Have you visited historical sites that helped you understand particular historical periods or cultural practices?
I visited colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, which is a restored 18th century town where interpreters demonstrate daily life during the colonial period. Seeing traditional crafts, cooking methods, and social interactions made that historical period much more tangible.
What did you learn from experiencing historical recreation rather than just reading about it?
The physical experience of seeing how people lived, worked, and interacted provided insights that books alone couldn't convey. Understanding the pace of daily life, the difficulty of simple tasks, and the importance of community cooperation became much clearer. The historical interpreters also explained how different social groups, wealthy landowners, skilled craftspeople, enslaved people experienced daily life very differently, which highlighted social inequalities of that era.
Historical sites can provide more nuanced understanding of complex social systems. What about museums or cultural centers? Have you had meaningful experiences learning about cultural heritage through exhibits?
I visited a folk life museum that demonstrated traditional crafts and cultural practices from various immigrant communities. Watching artisans create traditional textiles, pottery, and woodwork helped me appreciate the skill and cultural knowledge involved in these practices.
How did those demonstrations enhance your understanding of cultural heritage?
Seeing the time, patience, and expertise required for traditional crafts made me realize how much cultural knowledge can be lost when these practices aren't actively maintained. It also showed how traditional skills often combined practical function with artistic expression.
Hands-on cultural experiences can create deeper appreciation for heritage preservation efforts.
Now, let's learn how to discuss the relationship between historical understanding and modern life.
Historical influence: historical context, cultural background, traditional values, historical perspective, lessons from history, historical patterns, cultural evolution.
Change and continuity. Changing traditions, adapting customs, modern interpretations, cultural evolution, preserving heritage, embracing change, balancing old and new.
Historical relevance, learning from the past, historical lessons, understanding origins, cultural awareness, historical significance, contemporary relevance.
Let's practice discussing how historical understanding affects contemporary life and decision-making.
Do you think understanding history is important for making good decisions in modern life?
I believe historical understanding provides valuable perspective on current challenges. Many contemporary problems have historical precedents, and studying how previous generations address similar issues can inform modern solutions.
Can you give examples of how historical knowledge might influence contemporary decisions?
Understanding the historical development of democratic institutions helps people appreciate the importance of civic participation and voting rights. Learning about past economic crises can help societies recognize warning signs and implement preventative measures. Historical knowledge also helps people recognize propaganda techniques, understand the importance of press freedom, and appreciate the value of social institutions that took generations to develop.
How do you balance respecting traditional practices with embracing necessary social progress?
I think the key is distinguishing between traditions that reflect positive values and practices that may have been based on limited understanding or social inequalities of past eras.
What criteria do you use for evaluating whether traditions should be preserved or modified?
I consider whether traditional practices promote human dignity, community welfare, and positive relationships. Traditions that bring people together, preserve valuable knowledge, or strengthen family bonds are usually worth maintaining. However, practices that limit individual freedom, create social inequality, or harm people's welfare may need to be adapted or replaced with more inclusive alternatives.
Cultural evolution can preserve the positive aspects of traditions while addressing their limitations.
Now let's learn vocabulary for expressing opinions about cultural change and heritage preservation.
Supporting tradition. I value tradition. Heritage is important. Traditional practices should be preserved. Cultural continuity matters. We can learn from the past.
Supporting change. Society must progress. Some traditions are outdated. We need to adapt to modern life. Change brings improvement. New approaches work better.
Balanced perspectives. Tradition and progress can coexist. Some aspects should change while others remain. Cultural evolution is natural. Balance is important. Each generation adapts traditions.
Let's practice expressing opinions about cultural preservation and social change. This type of discussion is common in IELTS writing and speaking tasks about tradition and modernity.
How do you think societies should balance preserving cultural heritage with adapting to modern needs?
I believe communities can maintain the essential spirit of their traditions while adapting specific practices to contemporary circumstances. The key is understanding what values and purposes traditions serve, then finding modern ways to achieve those same goals.
Can you give examples of successful adaptation of traditional practices?
Many religious and cultural communities have adapted their educational methods using modern technology to teach traditional languages, music, and customs to younger generations. This preserves cultural knowledge while making it accessible to people with contemporary lifestyles. Traditional festivals often incorporate modern elements like sound systems and social media promotion while maintaining their core cultural and spiritual significance.
What role should governments play in cultural preservation efforts?
Governments can support heritage preservation through funding for cultural institutions, documentation of traditional practices, and educational programs that teach cultural history to all citizens, not just members of specific communities.
Do you think cultural preservation should be primarily community-led or supported by broader society?
I think both approaches are valuable. Communities are best positioned to determine which aspects of their heritage are most meaningful, but broader societal support helps ensure that cultural knowledge doesn't disappear due to economic pressures or social changes. Educational institutions, museums, and cultural centers can play important roles in making diverse heritage traditions accessible to everyone while respecting the communities that maintain them.
Let's review everything we learned today. We covered historical periods and events, cultural traditions and practices, historical sites and heritage preservation, the relationship between past and present, and expressing opinions about cultural change and heritage.
We learned essential vocabulary for discussing family history, describing cultural customs, visiting historical places, understanding historical context, and debating tradition versus progress.
Remember, history and traditions vocabulary is incredibly valuable for IELTS speaking and writing tasks about culture, society, education, and personal background. Plus, it helps you share your heritage and understand others' cultural experiences.
This vocabulary connects with our previous lessons too. History influences current events. Cultural traditions affect food and art. Historical understanding shapes educational approaches, and heritage preservation involves technology and environmental considerations.
Practice tip. This week, try interviewing older family members or community members about their memories and traditions, and then describe what you learn using today's vocabulary.
For IELTS preparation, practice answering common history and culture questions like, describe a traditional festival, or how important is it to preserve cultural heritage?
You can also practice comparing past and present ways of life using the change and continuity vocabulary we learned today.
Before we finish today's episode, we have your homework assignment.
Tell us about a family tradition or historical event that interests you in the comments. Use the vocabulary we learned today.
For example, you could write, my family maintains traditional holiday celebrations that have been passed down for generations. These customs help preserve our cultural identity while bringing family members together.
Or, I recently visited a historical museum that demonstrated artifacts from ancient civilizations. Learning about past cultures helped me understand how modern society developed over time.
Challenge. This week, research one historical event or cultural tradition that connects to your personal heritage and describe its significance using today's vocabulary.
That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for learning with us. Please subscribe to English After Hours, like this video, and share it with your friends who are learning English.
Remember, we upload new lessons every day, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss tomorrow's episode.
Keep practicing, honor your heritage, and we'll see you tomorrow for another essential English lesson.
Goodbye from English After Hours.
Bye, everyone!